Hello, hello, hello. Getting people in. Da, 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 da. Yeah. Man, man. The event on which this fiction is founded has been supposed by Dr. Darwin and some of the psychologists, writers of Germany, as not of impossible occurrence. I shall not be supposed as according the remotest degree of serious faith to such an imagination. Yet, in assuming it as the basis of work of fancy, I am not considering myself as merely weaving a series of supernatural terrors. The event on which the interest of the story depends exempt from the disadvantages of a mere tale of specters or enhancement. It was recommended by the novelty of the situation which is develops, and however impossible as a physical fact, affords a point of view to the imagination for a human passions more comprehensive and comprehending than any which the ordinary relation of existing events can yield. I have thus endeavored to preserve the truth of the elementary principles of human nature, while I have not to innovate upon their combinations. The Iliad, the tragedy of Greece and Shakespeare, and The Tempest and Midnight Summer Dream, and most especially Milton, Paradise Lost. Conform to this rule, and the most humble novelists who seek to confer or receive amusement from his labors may without presumption apply to the prose fiction. Welcome! We're reading Frankenstein. I'm just reading the preface. Have you read Frankenstein before? Let me know if you've read Frankenstein before in the chat. The circumstances on which my story rests was suggested in casual conversation. It was commenced partially as a source of amusement and partially as an expedient for exercising any untired resources of mine. Other motives were mingled in these. As the work proceeds, I am by no means indifferent to the manner in which whatever moral tendencies exist and the sentiments of character it contains shall affect the reader, yet my chief concern in this respect has been limited to the avoiding of entering effects of the novels of the present day. Well, hello there. Butterfly Kisses. Interesting. We're reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I'm just reading a preface at the moment. Has anyone read Frankenstein? I'm Professor Fox, and I love reading out loud and talking about literature. The subject is also of additional interest to the author that this story was begun in the Maastricht region, where the scene is Principality summer of 1816. The season was cold and rainy, and the evenings was crowded around a blazing wood fire. So, cold and rainy in the evenings. That sounds like Halloween. Sounds spooky. Whitney. Hello, Whitney. We're reading Frankenstein today. Just getting done with the preface here. The weather, however, suddenly became serene, and my two friends left me on a journey among the Alps and lost. And the magnificent scenes which they present, all memory of their ghostly visions, the following tales is the only one which has been completed. So these are going to be letters that are giving to to a person in England about their trip to the Alps. That's the beginning of Frankenstein. You will rejoice to hear that no disaster has accompanied the commencement of enterprise which you have regarded with such evil. Foreboding, I have arrived here yesterday, and my first task is to assure my dear sister of my welfare, and increasing confidence in the success of my undertaking. Well, this one kind of starts out similar to Dracula, December 11th, 1700s. I am already far north of London, and as I walk in the streets of Pittsburgh, I feel a cold northern breeze play upon my cheeks, which braces my nerves and fills me with delight. Do you understand this feeling, this breeze which has traveled from the regions towards which I am advancing? Gives me a foretaste of those icy climes. Inspirited by the wind of promise, may my dreams become more vivid, and I try in vain to be persuaded that the pole is the seat of frost and desolation. Well, hello, Sandy. We're reading Frankenstein. We're just getting through the letters here. They're in the Alps, and they're doing these letters. This is pretty neat. You know, when we started with this was Dracula also had a bunch of letters that were told at the beginning with John Harker, the solicitor. This is your nice Halloween. Then Margaret, the sun, is for her visible, is broad disk just skating in the horizon and diffusing a primeval splendor. Therefore, with you leave, my sister, I will put some trust in preceding navigators. Their snow and frost are banished and sailing over a calm sea. We may be wafted to the land suppressing in wonders and in beauty every region hitherto discovered on the habitable globe. Its productions and features may be without example, as the phenomenon of the heavenly bodies undoubtedly are in those undiscovered solitudes. What may not be expected in a country of eternal light, I may there discover the wondrous power which attracts the needle and may regulate 1,000 sestral observation. 1,000 sestral observations that require only this voyage to render their seeming ecstasies consist forever. Shall I tire my errant curiosity with the sight of a part of the world, the foot of man? So today we're reading Frankenstein. It is part science fiction, part horror. Frankenstein, one of the first major science fictions. We are in the Alps now talking to our dear sister. Similar to the starting of Dracula, we are writing letters back and forth. Pretty cool. Which may not be expected in the country of eternal light. I may there discover the wondrous power which attracts the needle and may regulate 1,000. There are many of my instincts that are sufferant to my conqueror of all fear of danger of death, and to induce me to commence this laborious voyage with the joy of childs, will embark in the little boat with his holiday mates on an expedition of discovery, his native river. But supposing all these conjectures to be false, you cannot contest the benefit which I shall confer on all mankind to the last generation, by discovering a passage near the pole to those centuries to reach, which at present so many months are reconsiderable, can only be effected by an undertaking such as mine. So, does anybody know? So back in the 1800s, even in the 19th century, they were obsessed with getting to the poles. Does anybody know a famous explorer that did the poles? Most famously, I would say the Southern Pole is the one I'm thinking of. Southern Pole. But this is interesting how Mary Shelley puts in discovering the poles in her work, during the time of this writing, that was something that people were thinking about. But I prefer glory to every excitement that will place in my path, although that some encouraging voice would answer the affirmative. My courage, my resolution is firm. By my hopes flatulent, my spirits are often depressed. I am about to proceed on a long and difficult voyage, the emergencies of which I will demand all my fortitude. I am required not only to rise the spirits of others, but to sometimes sustain my own. When there is failing, there is this most favorable period of traveling in Russia. They fly quickly over the snow in their sleds, and the motion is pleasant, and, in my opinion, for more agreeable than that of England's stagecoaches. The cold is not excessive if you were wrapped in furs, a dress in which I have already adopted, for there is a great difference between walking on the deck and remaining seated motionless for hours, than no exercise prevents the blood from actually freezing in your veins. I have no ambition to the loss of my life on the post road between St. Petersburg and Archangel. So this begins talking about the sled dogs and stuff like that. We read Call of the Wild, which was also about a lot of sled dogs. But Mary Shelley is describing the exploration of the poles. I shall depart from my letter town in a fortnight, or in 3 weeks, and my intention to hire a ship there, which can easily be done by paying the insurance for the owner, and to engage as many sailors as think necessary among those who are accustomed to the whale fishing. I do not intend to sail until the month of June. And when shall I return? Oh, dear sister, how can I answer the question? If I succeed, many, many months, perhaps years, will pass before you and I may feet. I will fail. You will see me here again. Ever so farewell, my dear, excellent Margaret. Heaven shower down blessings on you, and save me that I may again and again testify gratitude for all the loving kindness. Your affectionate brother, Walton. So now he's going to be doing his letters from Archangel to Margaret. How slowly the time passes here, encompassed as I am by the frost and snow, yet a second step is taken towards my enterprise. I have hired a vessel, and I am occupied in collecting my sailors, those who I have already engaged, appeared on by the men whom I can depend on, are certainly possessed of doubtless courage. But I have one want which I have never yet been able to satisfy, in the absence of the object of which I now feel at a most severe evil. I have no friend. Margaret, when I was glowing with the enthusiasm of success, there will be none to participate my joy. If I am assailed by disappointment, no one will endeavor to sustain me on the dejection. I shall commit my thoughts to paper, it is true, but that is a poor medium for the communication of feeling. I desire the company of a man who can sympathize with me. I desire the company of men who could sympathize with me, whose eyes would reply to mine. You may dream me romantic, my dear sister, but I bitterly feel the want of a friend. So, again, this is going to be a common theme in this book, isolation. Hello, Joe. We're reading Frankenstein. Have you read Frankenstein before? I am by birth, and my family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. My ancestors have been for many years counselors, and my father had filled several public stations with honor and reputation. He was respected by all who knew him for his integrity and attention to public business. He passed his younger days perpetually occupied by the affairs of his country, and it was not until the decline of life that he thought of marrying and bestowing on the state, who might carry his virtues and his name down to prosperity. As the circumstances of his marriage illustrate his character, I cannot refrain from relating them. One of his most intimate friends was a merchant who, from a flourishing state, fell through numerous mischievous into property. This man, whose name was of a proud and unbending disposition, and he could not bear to live in poverty and oblivion. In the same country where he had formerly been distinguished for his rank and magnificence. Um, yeah. Well, okay, if you haven't read it, it's a classic science fiction horror, where you get those tropes. If you were watching Wednesday, this is where those Franks come from. This is also where those Da Vinci's come from, where you have the mad scientists. It's pretty unique. But we're reading it together, and we'll get through it. It has a little bit of science fiction and a little bit of horror in there. When he lived unknown in Rutgers, my father loved Bayfort with his truest friend, Ship, and he was deadly grieved by his retreat for those unfortunate circumstances. He grieved also for the loss of society and resolved to seek him out and endeavor to persuade him to begin the world again for his credit and assistance. And it's kind of unique because it's one of those slow burns. In the movies, like the exciting parts are like the very end of the book. There's a lot of buildup, just like Dracula, and then you'll get to the exciting parts. Beaufort had to take official measures to conceal himself, and he was 10 months before my father discovered his abode. Overjoyed at the discovery, he hastened to the house which he was situated in a mean street near the Rus. But when he entered, misery and his departures alone welcomed him. Beaufort had saved but a very small sum of money from the wreck of his fortunes, but he was sufficient to provide him with a sum for some months. In the meantime, he hoped to procure some respectable employment in a merchant's house. Hello, Amy. We're reading Frankenstein. Come join us. If you read Frankenstein, feel free to talk out and tell us what you think about Frankenstein. If anybody has read Frankenstein before. Hello, friendly. We're reading Frankenstein. It's been a long time, my friend. The intern was consequently spent in action. His grief only became more deep and rankling. When he had a leisure for reflection, and at length he took so fast hold of his mind that at the end of the 3 months, he lay on bed of sickness incapable of any exertion. His daughter attended him with the greatest tenderness, but she saw with despair that their little fund was rapidly decreasing and that there was no other prospect of support. But Caroline possessed a mind of uncommon mold, and her courage rose to support her in the adversary. She procured plain work. She pleaded straw, and by various means contrived to earn a pittance securely sufficient to support life. So she's working hard to support herself. Several months passed in the manner. Her father grew worse. Her time was more entirely occupied in tending him. Her means of substance decreased, and in the 10th month her father was unalived in her arms, leaving her an orphan and a beggar. This last blow overcame her, and she knelt by Beaufort's coffin, weeping bitterly. With my father entered the chamber. He came like a protecting spirit to the poor girl, who committed herself to his care, and after the inheritance of his friend, he conducted her to Geneva and placed her under the protection of relations. 2 years after this event, Caroline became his wife. So he married his friend's daughter. Interesting. When my father became a husband and a parent, he found his time so occupied by the duties of his new situation that he relinquished many of his public employments and devoted himself to the education of his children. Of these I was the oldest, and a destined successor to all his labors and utility. No creature could have more tender parents than mine. My improvement in health were their constant care, especially as I remained for several years their only child. But before I continue my narrative, I must record an incident which took place when I was 4 years of age. My father had a sister whom he tenderly loved and who he had married early in life, an Italian gentleman. Soon after her marriage, she had accompanied her husband into the native country, and for some years my father had very little communication with her. About the time I mentioned, she unalived. In a few months afterwards, he received a letter from her husband, acquainting him with his intention of marrying an Italian lady and requesting my father to take charge of the infant Elizabeth, the only child of his deceased sister. It is my wish, he said, that you should consider her as your own daughter, and educate her thus. Her mother's fortune is secure to her. The documents in which I will commit to you keeping, reflecting upon this proposition, and decide whether you would prefer educating your niece yourself to her being brought up by a stepmother. My father did not hesitate. He immediately went to Italy, and he might accompany the little Elizabeth to her future home. I have often heard my mother say that she was at that time the most beautiful child she had ever seen, and sewed sighs even though of a gentle and affectionate disposition. This indication of the desire to blind as closely as possible the ties of domestic love determined my mother to consider Elizabeth as my future wife, a design which she never found reason to repent. Interesting. From this time, Elizabeth became my playfellow, and as we grew older, my friend. She was docile and good-tempered, yet happy and playful as a summer insect. Although she was lively and animated, her feelings were strong and deep, and her disposition uncomfortably affectionate. No one could better enjoy liberty, yet no one could submit with more grace that she did not constrain and caprice. Her imagination was luxuriant, yet her capability of application was great. Her person was the image of mine, her hazel eyes, although as lively as a bird's, possession an attractive softness. Her figure was light and airy, and though capable of enduring great fatigue, she appeared the most fragile creature in the world. While I admired her understanding and fancy, I loved to tend on her as I should on a favorite animal, and I never saw so much grace both of person and mind untied to so little pretense. Treating your loved one like a little animal. Interesting. Everyone adored Elizabeth. If the servants had any request to make, it was always through her incursions, and we were strangers to any species of disunion and dispute. For, although there was a great dissimilitude in our character, there was an harmony in that the very dissimilitude I was more calm and philosophical than any companion, yet my temper was not so yielding. My application was of longer endurance, but it was not so severe as to endure a delight in the investigation of facts relative to the actual world. She bruised herself in following the creations of the poets. The world was to me a secret which I desired to discover. To her it was a vacant which she sought to people with imagination of her own. Interesting. My brothers were considerably younger than myself, but I had a friend and one of my schoolfellows who, consummate for the defiancy, Henry, was the son of a merchant of Geneva, an intimate friend of my father's. He was a boy, singular talent and fancy. I remember when he was 9 years old, he wrote a fairy tale, which was the delight of amusement of all his companions. His favorite study consisted of books and chivalry and romance, and when very young, I can remember that he used to act plays composed by him out of these favorite books, the principal characters of which were Orlando, Robin Hood, Aeneas, and St. George. So, that's neat. That's why you read his classics. So Robin Hood is also another one that I'd like to get into, and it's neat that Robin Hood is mentioned in Frankenstein. That is very neat. How are you doing? Antlers. Yeah, I like your content, Antlers. I do like the knights in shining armor, and I do like all your friends, especially the pickle priest. That's one of my favorite people to watch. No youth could have passed more happily than mine. My parents were indulgent, and my companions admirable. Our studies were never forced, and by some means we always had it in place and view, which decided to us to endure in the prosecutions of them. It was by this method, and not by my emulation, that we were urged to application. Elizabeth was not excited to apply herself to drawing, and her companion might not outspurt her, but through the desire of pleasing her aunt, by the repetition of some favorite scene, done by her own hand, we learned Latin and English, that we might read the writings in those languages, and so far from the study being more odious, those of punishment, beloved anticipation, and other amusements would have been the labors of other children. Perhaps we did not read so many books or learn languages so quickly as those who are disciplined, and according to the ordinary methods by which was learned, we was impressed to more deeply on our memories. In this description of domestic circle, I include Henry, for he was constantly with us. He went to school with me and generally passed in the afternoon at our house for being an only child. And despite his companions at home, his father was well pleased that he should find associates at our house, and we were never completely happy when Henry was absent. Hello, Megan. We're reading Frankenstein, is what we're reading. It has a very slow beginning, but we're setting up the characters of Henry, Elizabeth, and obviously Dr. Frankenstein. I feel pleasure in dwelling on the recollection of childhood before misfortunes. I tainted my mind, and change has brought visions of intense usefulness into gloomy and narrow reflection upon self. But in the drawing the picture of my early days, I must not omit to record those events which led by sensible steps to my father, tale of misery, for when I would account to myself for birth of the passion which affords ruled my destiny, I find it arise like a mountain river from ingoed and almost forgotten sources, but swelling as it proceeded, it became a torrent, which in the course swept away all my hopes and joys. Natural philosophy is a genius that had regulated my fate. I desired, therefore, in the narration to the state those facts which led to my propensity for the sciences. When I was 13 years of age, we went on a party of pleasure to the baths near. The inclemency of the weather obliged to us to remain a day confined to the inn. In this house, I chanced to find a volume of the works of Cornelius. I opened it with apathy. The theory which I attempts to demonstrate and the wonderful facts which he relates soon changed the feelings into enthusiasm. A new light seemed to dawn upon my mind, and bounding with joy, I communicate my discovery to my father. I cannot help remark here the many opportunities instructors possess of directing the attention of their pupils to useful knowledge, which they utterly neglect. My father looked carelessly at the title page of the book and said, "Ah, Cornelius, my dear Victor, do not hesitate your time upon this. It is such trash." If instead of this remark, my father had taken the pains to explain to me that the principles had been entirely exploited, and that a modern system of science had been introduced, which possessed much greater power than the ancient, because the power of the latter were criminal, while those of the former were real and practical. Under such circumstances, I should certainly have thrown it aside, and with my imagination, warmed as it should, probably have applied myself to the more rational theory of chemistry, which was as a result more modern discoveries. It is often possible that the train of my ideals would have received the fatal implosion that led on to my ruin. But my cursory glance my father had taken of my volume by no means assured me that I was acquainted with its contents, and I continued to read with the greatest avidity. Yes. So, he blames his father for his ruin. Interesting. Not taking his own, not owning up for his own faults. When I returned home, my first care was to procure the whole works of this author, and afterwards Albertus Magnus. I read and studied the wild fancy of these writers with very delight. They appeared to my treasures known to a few beside myself, and although I often wished to communicate these secret stories of knowledge to my father, yet his indifferent censure of my favorite always withheld me. I disclosed my discoveries to Elizabeth, therefore under a promise of strict secrecy, but she did not interest herself in the subject, and I was left by her to pursue my studies alone. It may appear very strange that a disciple of Albertus Magnus should arise in the 18th century, but only family was not scientific, and I had not attended any of the lectures given in the schools of Geneva. My dreams were therefore undisturbed by reality, and I entered with the greatest diligence into the search of the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life, but the latter obtained my undivided attention. Wealth was an interior object, but what a glory would tend to discovery if I could banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to any but a violent death. So the Philosopher's Stone is mentioned. Harry Potter and Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. That was a very popular book. Got some things in here. He has the quest for the Philosopher's Stone. Eternal life. Nor were there any of my own visions. The raising of ghosts and devils was a promised literary accordance by my favorite authors, the fulfillment which I most eagerly sought, and I made incantation were successful. I attribute my fellow rather to my own experience and mistakes than to my want or skill of infidelity in my instructions. The natural phenomenon that takes place every day before our eyes did not escape my examinations to stillness, and the wonderful effects of steam, possessed of which my favorite author were utterly ignorant, excited my astonishment, but my outermost wonder was. Engaged by some experiments on an air pump which I saw employed by a gentleman who we were in habit of visiting, the arrogance of my early philosophers on those and several other points served to decrease their credit with me, but I could not entirely throw them aside before some other system should occupy their place in my mind. When I was about 15 years old, we had retired to our house when we witnessed a most violent and terrible thunderstorm and an advance from behind the mountains of Jura, and the thunderous burst at once with frightful loudness, and from various quarters of the heavens I remained while the storm lasted, watching its progress with curiosity and delight. As I stood at the door, and on a sudden I beheld a stream of fire issue from an old and beautiful oak, which stood about 20 yards from our house, and so soon as the dazzling light vanished, the oak had disappeared, and nothing remained but a blasting stump. When we visited the next morning, we found the tree shattered in a single manner, and it was not splintered by the shock, but entirely reduced then by the wood. I never beheld anything such entirely destroyed. The catastrophe of these trees excited my extreme astonishment, and I eagerly inquired my father's nature. Hello, Sonny, we're reading Frankenstein. Have you read Frankenstein before? He constructed a small electrical machine and exhibited a few experiments. He had made also a kite with a wire and a string which drew down the fluid from the clouds. This last stroke completed the overthrow of Cornelius Albertomagus, who had so long reigned the lords of my imagination, but by some fatality I did not feel inclined to commence the study of any modern system, and his desolation was influenced by the following circumstances. My father expressed a wish that I should attend a course of lectures upon natural philosophy, to which I cheerfully consented. Some accident prevented my attending these lectures until the course was nearly finished. The lecture, being therefore one of the last, was entirely incomprehensible to me. The professor discoursed the greatest fluency of potassium and boron, of sulfates and oxides, terms to which I could affix no idea, and I became disgusted with the science of natural philosophy. Although I still read, and with delight, authors in my extermination of nearly equal interest and utility, my occupation at this age were partly the mathematics and most of the branches of study hampering the sciences. I was busily employed in learning languages. Latin was already familiar to me, and I began to read some of the easiest Greek authors without the help of a lexicon. So that would be something that would help you read. Interesting. I also perfectly understood English and German. This was the list of my accomplishments of the age of 17. And you may conceive that my honors were fully employed in acquiring and maintaining a knowledge of this various literature. Another task also devolved upon me when I became the instructor of my brothers. Ernest was 6 years younger than myself, and was my principal pupil. He had been afflicted with an ill health from his infancy, although which Elizabeth and I had been, and his constant nurse and disposition was gentle, but he was capable of any severe application. William, the youngest of our family, was yet an infant and the most beautiful little fellow in the world. His lively blue eyes, dimpled cheeks, and endearing manner inspired the tenderest affection. Such was our domestic circle, from which care and playing, seeing for our apprenticeships, my father directed our studies, and my mother partook of our enjoyments. Neither of us possessed the slightest preeminence over the other. The voice of command was never heard amongst us, but mutual affection engaged us to all comply with to obey the slightest desire of each other. All right. That is chapter 1. So let's read. I'm done with chapter 1. So you want to learn a little more about the author. So the life and work of Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley dedicated her first novel, Frankenstein, the one that we are reading, or The Modern Prometheus, to her father, William Godwin. Godwin, a respected writer himself, was the author of 2 well-known books, Prodigal Jesus and Caleb Williams. Godwin's work contained controversial philosophy, ideals, and critiques of society. His beliefs in the inherent decency of human beings influenced a number of the Romantic poets of the time. In 1797, he married Mary, a distinguished writer whose A Vindication of the Rights of Woman was published in 1792. They had been married less than a year when she unalived after giving birth to their daughter, Mary. Hello! Thank you for the heart me. We are doing just reading Frankenstein. Right now I'm just going over things about Mary Shelley. What is that? Is it a crystal rose? What's a crystal rose? Crystal rose. Interesting crystal rose. Yes. Mary, who was born on August 30th, 1797. After Godwin remarried, Mary was raised by her stepmother, Miss Claremont, a widow with 2 children of her own. Although Godwin had hoped to provide a stable family of his daughter, Mary had a difficult childhood due to a part to her contentious the home of the Baxters, who were friends of her father. It was Baxter's house in May 1814 that she met Percy Shelley, a notable young poet who was there visiting Godwin. Although Percy was already married, he and Mary fell in love. So, in her own life, there is this affair going on. Interesting. No wonder she's a good writer. There's affair, excitement. Five months later, Percy and Mary traveled to Switzerland, where they rented a cottage for the summer. Their neighbors included their friend Lord Byron, who had a home near Geneva. During a rainy spell, when the evenings were cold and damp, Mary, Percy, and Byron would gather in front of Byron's fireplace and entertain each other by reading German ghost stories. Inspired by the tales, the 3 friends agreed to each write a story similar to the ones that they had been reading. Although Percy and Byron never completed theirs, Mary's went on to write a story that would eventually become the novel Frankenstein. Well, ain't that exciting? She wrote this in a dark and stormy night, maybe on Halloween night. But yeah, the eventful year concluded in tragedy after Shelley's wife, Harriet, committed unaliving. Oh, wow. Drowning herself on December 10th, 1816. Percy and Mary were legally married 3 weeks later. Another son, Percy Florence, was born shortly after the wedding. Wow, wow, wow. Tragedy striking everywhere. Hello, Mandy. We're reading Frankenstein. Thank you for that heart me. Have you ever read Frankenstein before? Right now, I'm going over the most tragic life of Mary Shelley and understanding why she actually was able to write this. Mary's novel Frankenstein was published in 1880, and its success brought Mary considerable recognition. 5 months after it was published, a friend wrote from England that the book was universally known and read. But the successful would soon be overshadowed by tragedy in the author's life. Yeah, it's a book similar to Dracula. I mean, it starts off with letters just like Dracula does. So far, it's been a very slow burn. And what's interesting is the movies really only depict the exciting parts. And most of it's just Victor, who is Frankenstein, telling us how great he is. Which is not that exciting. Then 3 years later, on July 8th, 1820, Percy Shelley... Oh my gosh! So, I don't know, like if you watch the movie Frankenstein, there's a drowning, correct? So there's a drowning of a young girl. So, in Mary Shelley's life, We're up to 3 drownings. I don't know. Maybe there's something going on with Mary Shelley. Are you the person drowning people? This is weird. Percy Shelley drowned with 2 companions when his boat was caught in a heavy squall on the Bay of Italy. In spite of the unhappiness in her life, Mary Shelley continued to write. Her second novel was a success after it was published in 1823. Other works include The Last Man, 1826. Well, that might be one I might want to read. The Last Man, 1826. The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck, a romance, never heard of that. Lordor, never heard of that. And Faulkner. An account of her European travels in the 1840s was published in 2 volumes under the Rambles of Germany. She also the author of 2 dramas, as well as a number of short stories and poems. Shelley's only surviving child, Percy Florence, became Lord Shelley in 1844 and married a year later, and Mary lived comfortably with his family until her unaliving at the age of 54 in February 1851. Yeah, she kind of does need her own true crime cesspool, as all her children drown, except one. Yeah, it's sad, but it's pretty awful. So her children drown, and then her stepmom committed unaliving herself. So there's a lot of tragedy in her life that helped her write Frankenstein. Published in 1880, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, added up the growing body of romantic fiction published in the early 1800s. Shelley became one of the most influential writers of both romantic and Gothic fiction, especially for Frankenstein, a new genre known today as science fiction. So that's what's exciting about Frankenstein. It brought us the new genre, science fiction, which is also going to be, where's it at? That is also, when we're talking about science fiction, Gothic science fiction to be exact, that would also be the setting for this story, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which also is a classic horror genre and classic for Halloween. Is what this book, Frankenstein, made this one happen. Gothic romance often deals with a mysterious and supernatural subject. Gothic stories frequently take place in rugged natural settings near ancient castles or monasteries. So, just like Dracula, this one is going to take place around creepy castles, dark and stormy nights, which was the night that she wrote the story, and very loneliness, isolated areas, which is creepy. Romanticism was a separate intellectual and artistic movement that began in Europe in the middle of the 18th century. Romantics who promoted the uniqueness of individual imagination and expression. Wait a minute. So they're saying Frankenstein is a romantic, Gothic science fiction novel. Frankenstein is a romantic, Gothic science fiction novel. Would we say that Dracula also fits that? Well, if this one fits that, then obviously Dracula would fit that as well, because they're pretty similar. In addition to their philosophical and spiritual concerns, the Romantic writers were also affected by the political events of the time beginning in 1789. The French Revolution has created uproar in Europe. So there's going to be, that's when they're attacking the monster. That's where they get that. Social recognition lasted for the next 10 years as the rebellion continued to change the social structure. Government of France, while many of the Romantics favored the original principles of the Revolution, which abolished the French monarchy. So I believe somewhere in this novel, we will be part of the French Revolution. So that was what was going on when Mary Shelley was writing this book. So what was going on is basically we had the French Revolution. We're talking about Napoleon Bonaparte taking over, Napoleon also getting exiled, and that is the time that this book was written. In spite of the mixed reviews and received, Frankenstein was a bestseller and would remain popular for generations. Mary Shelley became a respected author with numerous titles to her credit. It is remarkable the power of her first novel that continues to inspire a host of horror stories and science fiction tales. Considering the book's lasting influence, it is hardly surprising the film adaptations of Frankenstein are still being made today. So a good example of where Frankenstein inspires our film and pop culture. You're looking at the series Wednesday. We have Victor Frankenstein. He would be considered a Da Vinci, that he's able to bring life to undead objects, which would be that slurp guy. And then you have the Franks, which are Frankensteins, which would be based off of this book. And those are the people that are usually the butlers. And then you also have an obsession with lightning or electricity, which some of those characters have. So that's where the inspiration comes to. Major list of characters in this book. We have Robert Walton, an explorer who meets and cares for Victor. We have the creature. He's not called the monster. He's called the creature. Victor Frankenstein's creature. He's not in the movies, he's usually a monster, but in this he is referred to as a creature. That's important. We have Victor Frankenstein, a young man born in Switzerland whose study of science and natural philosophy leads to his tragic creation of the creature. We have oh goodness, how do I say this word? I got it. Alp Hosen Frankenstein, Victor's father, a wealthy, influential man with humanitarian concerns. Beaufort, Alp Hosen's Frankenstein's friend and Caroline's father. We have Caroline, Victor's mother and wife. She unalives shortly before Victor leaves. We have Elizabeth, a young woman who is adopted by the Frankenstein family. She then marries Victor, and we'll see what happens to her. Then we have Henry, Victor's best friend and closest confidant. We'll also see what happens to him as well. We have Ernest Frankenstein, Victor's youngest brother. We have William Frankenstein, Victor's youngest brother. And we'll also find out what happens to that young man. Justine Mortis, a young woman who lives with the Frankenstein family. Justine is falsely accused of something that she did not do. Interesting, and we'll find out what happens to her when she is falsely accused. We have Mr. Crumpy, Victor's philosopher professor of a university. And we have another professor who becomes Victor's mentor. We have Felix de Lacy, a young peasant that the creature comes across. We have Agatha de Lucy, that's Felix's sister. We have M. de Lacy, Felix's Agatha's father. We have Strafer, a young Turkish woman. And we have a nurse. So those are some of the characters that will be in this book. Most of the characters meet unfortunate circumstances. All right, let's go back to chapter 2 before we end the live, and we'll read chapter 2 and talk about it. But yeah, that's Frankenstein. All written on a stormy afternoon. That's what these kids thought was fun, was writing horror stories to each other. Interesting. The next day, contrary to the protagonists of our guidance, was fine. Although clouded, we visited the source and rode about the valley until evening. These sublime and magnificent scenes afforded me the greatest consolation that I was capable of receiving. They elevated me from the littleness of feeling, and although they did not remove my grief, they subdued and tranquilized it. In some degree, also, they diverted my mind from the thoughts over which I had brooded for the last month. I returned in the evening, fatigued but less unhappy, and conversed with my family with more cheerfulness than I had been my custom for the same time. My father was pleased, and Elizabeth overjoyed. "My dear cousin," she said, "you see what happiness you diffuse when you are happy. Do not repulse again." So, yeah, I think the first few chapters are going to be hard to get through. We're basically, he's Kylo Ren. He's being a little emo here. He's oh, woe is me. I'm Victor, and I don't amount to nothing. And then all these people are trying to up his get him out of depression, and he's just going through being a typical 15, 16 to 18-year-old boy that just feels that they are awful and that nothing is great. So that's what we're reading. The following morning, the rain poured down in torrents, and thick the mist had the summits of the mountains. I rose early, but felt unusual melancholy. The rain depressed me, and my old feelings recurred, and I was miserable. I knew how disappointed my father would be at the sudden change, and I wished to avoid him until I had recovered myself so far to be enabled to conceal those feelings. I feel like I'm inside the mind of my teenager right now. That had overpowered me. I knew that they would remain at the day at the end. As I had ever endured myself to rain, moisture, and cold, I resolved to go alone to the summit of the mountain, and I remembered the effect that the view of the tremendous and ever-moving glacier had produced upon my mind, and I first saw it. It had then filled me with a sublime ecstasy that gave me wings to my soul, and allowed it to soar from the obscure world to light and joy. The sight of the awful and majestic in nature had indeed always the effects of solemnizing my mind and causing me to forget the passing cares of life. I determined to go alone, for I was well acquainted with the path, and the presence of another would destroy the solitary grandeur of the scene. The ascent impervious by the path is cut and continue in shortest windings, which enabled those to surmount the proceedings of the mountain. It is a scene terribly desolate. In a thousand spots the traces of the winter avalanche may be perceived, where trees lie broken and stewed on the ground. Some entirely destroyed, others bent, leaning upon the jolting rocks of the mountains upon other trees. The path, as you ascend higher, is intersected by the ravine of snow, down which stones continually roll from above. One of them in particular is dangerous, as a slightless sound, such as even a speaking in a loud voice, produces a concussion of air sniffing to draw destruction upon the head of the speaker. The pines are not tall or luxuriant, but they are somber and add an air of sovereignty to the rivers which ran through it, and curling in thick reefs around the opposite mountain, whose summits were hid in the uniform clouds, while rain poured from the dark sky, and added to the melancholy impression I received from the objection around. Alas, why? It only renders them more necessary beings, and my impulse were confined to hunger, thirst, and desire. We might be nearly free, but now we are moved by every wind that blows, and a chance word of the scene that the world may convey to us. As you read this, you understand why they cut out most of this in the movies. It's just his inner thoughts, and eventually he will come. You're really getting why he is so excited about science. We rest and dream his power to poison sleep. We rise, one wandering thought pollutes the day. We feel, conceive, or reason, laugh, or weep. Embrace fond woe, or cast our cares away. It is the same, for be in joy or sorrow, the path of the departure still is free. Man's understand may nearer be like his morrow, nor my endure, but motably. It was nearly noon when I arrived at the top of the ascent. For some time I sat upon the rock that overlooked the sea of ice. I mist covered both, in that the surrounding mountains perceived a breeze destroying the cloud, and I descend upon the glacier. The surface is very uneven, rising like the waves of a troubled sea, descending low and enterprising by the rifts that sank deep. The field of ice is almost a league in width, but I have spent nearly 2 hours in crossing it. The opposite mountain and a bare particular rock from the side where I now stood was exactly opposite of the distance. Ooh! Thank you for your awesomes. That is very nice of you. Victor thinks he's very awesome, and that is good. And then he gets sad. But thank you for all that, Mandy. I'm glad you're enjoying Victor's inner thoughts of how he gets onto the top of the mountain. The sea, or rather the vast river of ice, wound among the descending mountains, whose aerial summits hung over his recesses. Their icy and glittering peaks shone in the sunlight over the clouds. You know what is good about this is you can understand the detail in which back then when they wrote, we saw this in Dracula as well. They write about the surroundings so much. The atmosphere of the book also has an overlayer of, in this book we're talking about isolation. And Dracula, we're talking about fear and dread. So everything in the atmosphere of the town that we're going to gave us fear. And this, everything we do, we feel the isolation. We feel how Victor feels he is isolated from everybody else. He's different from anybody else. That's what we're getting at and why we want to be alone in the mountains right now. As I said, this is suddenly beheld the figure of a man. At some distance it advanced towards me with a superhuman speed. He bounded over the crevasse in the ice, among which I had walked with caution. His stature also, as he approached, seemed to exceed that of a normal man. And I felt faintness seize me, but I was quickly restored by the cold gale of mountains. I perceived, as the shape came nearer, slight, tremendous, and abnormal, that in whom I had created. I trembled with rage and horror, resolving to what here approached, and then close with him a mortal combat. He approached, his countenance bespoke bitter anguish combined with disdain and magnitude, while his unearthly ugliness rendered it almost too horrid for a human eye. But I secretly observed this anger, and hated at first retrieved outerness. Devil, I exclaimed, do you dare approach me? And do you fear the fierce vengeance of my arm wrenked on your miserable head? Begone, vile insect, or rather stay, that I may tremble you to dust. And oh, that I could, with the extinction of your miserable existence, restore those victims whom you have so diabolically unalived. I experienced this repetition with such demon. All men hate the wretch. How then must I be hated, for whom I am miserable beyond all living things? Yet you, my creator, thus has spun me, thy creator, to whom thou art bound by ties only dissolved by me. Annihilation of one, you pursue to unalive me. How dare you spat those with life? Do you duty towards me, and I will do mine towards you, and the rest of mankind. If you will comply with me, my conditions, I will leave them and you at peace. But if you refuse, I will glut the maw of unaliving until it is sustained with the blood of your remaining friends. Monster, fiend thou art! Thou torturess of hell art too mild a vengeance for their crimes. Wretched devil, you reproach me with your creation. Come on, then, that I may extinguish the spark which I also so neglectfully bestowed. My rage without bounds, I sprang to him, and plied by all the feeling which can arm one being against the existence of another. He easily eluded me and said, be calm. I entreat you to hear before you give vent to your hatred on my devoted head. Have I not suffered enough that you seek to increase my misery? Life, although it may only be a recollection of anguish, and is dear to me, and I will defend it. Remember, thou hast made me more powerful than myself. Thy height is superior to mine, my joints more sublime. But I will not be tempted to set myself in opposition to thee. I am thy creature, and then I will be even mild and docile to my natural lord and king, if thou wilt also perform thy part, that which thou ownest me. O Frankenstein, be not equitable to every other, and tremble upon me alone, to whom thy justice and even the clemency of affection is must due. Remember that I am thy creature, and I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel whom thou drivest from joy for your misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss from which I am alone and irretrievably excluded, I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a friend, made me happy, and I shall again be virtuous. Okay. Begone! I will not hear you. There be no community between you and me. We are enemies. Begone, or let us try our strength and fight in which one must fall. How can I move thee? Will no entreaties cause that turn a favorable eye upon my creature who implores the goodness and compassion? Believe me, Frankenstein, I am benevolent. My soul glowed with love and humanity, but I am not alone. Miserably alone. You, my creator, adore me. What I hope can I gather from your fellow creatures who owe me nothing? They spurn and hate me. The desire, mountains, and dairy glaciers are my refuge. I have wandered here many days. The caves of ice, which I only do not fear, are a dwelling to me, and I am the only one which man does not grudge. This bleak sky I have, for they are kinder to me, your fellow beings, my multitude of mankind known of my existence. Okay, the monster wants to be alone. Hello, Jason. Good to see you. Yeah, we're reading Frankenstein. Frankenstein has met his creation out in the wilderness, in the snow, and now they're talking back and forth, and Frankenstein wants to unalive it. They would be do as you do, and I arm myself for my destruction, shall I not? Then hate them or adore me. I will keep no terms with my enemies. I am miserable, and they shall share my wretchedness. Yet it is you in your power to overcome me and deliver them from an evil which is in only remains for you to make it so great. And not only you and your family, but thousands of others shall be swallowed up in the whirlwinds of its rage. Yet you can press be removed, and do not disdain me. Listen to my tale when you have heard that. Abandon or consummate me, as you shall judge that I deserve. But hear me, the guilty are allowed by human law, blood as may be. Ooh, thank you for those awesomes, Jason. I had to do my little make sure you're not a robot thing on the live. Why do you call me to remembrance the circumstance which I shudder to reflect that I am been the miserable origin and author? Cursed by day, adored devil, in which you first saw light. Curse, although I am cursed myself. By hands that formed you, you have made me wretched beyond expression. You have left me no power to consider whether I am just to you or not. Begone. Relieve me from the sight of your detest form. Okay, yeah, Frankenstein does not like what he created. Thus I relieve thee, my creator, he said, and I placed his hated hands before my eyes, which I flung from me with violence. Thus I take here my sight when you adore. Still thou canst listen to me, and grant me thy compassion by the virtues that I once possessed. I demand this from you. Hear my tale. It is long and strange, and the temperature of this place is not fitting to the fine sensations come to hunt upon the mountain. The sun is yet high in the heavens before it descends to hide itself behind you snowy percibles and illuminate another world. You will have heard my story and can decide on you it rests, whether I quit forever the neighborhood of man and lead a harmless life or become the scourge of your fellow creature and the author of your own speedy ruin. Well, me, personally, I'm like, if I was Frankenstein and I'm sitting here listening to this monster for way too long, be like, and Monty Python words, get on with it! Just tell me your story and then I'll decide if I want to get rid of you or not. As he said this, he led the way across the ice. I followed. My heart was full. I did not answer him, but as I proceeded, I weighed the various arguments that he had used, and determined at least to listen to his tale. I was partly urged by curiosity, and compassion confirmed my resolution. I had heretofore supposed him to be the unaliver of my brother, and I eagerly sought confirmation or denial of this opinion. For the first time also I felt what the duties of the Creator towards his creature were, and that I ought to render him happy before I complain of his wickedness. These motives urged me to comply with his demand. We crossed the ice. Therefore, he ascended the opposite rock. The air was cold, and the rain again began to descend. We entered the hut, the fiend with an air of exclusion, with a heavy heart and depressed spirits, but I consented to listen, and seating myself by the fire with my odious companion, I lighted, and thus began his tale. So, chapter 3, we're going to hear about what this creature or monster did when he was alone, when he was out of Frankenstein's sight, because Victor Frankenstein created this monster and then was like, oh, I didn't like it. I'm out of here. I'm going to go back to school. That's very bizarre, but yeah. So this is kind of like you leaving your child to figure out life on its own. Very cruel, Frankenstein. So. So let's just go over these last two chapters. So Victor is now he's fully aware that he can no longer ignore his creation at this time. And after Justine is executed, so Justine was accused for the murders or the unalivings that the monster supposedly did. The grief and depression that continues to plague him and desire for revenge, tormented by the deaths of the unaliving of his loved ones, Victor considers the possibility that revenge against the creature may be the only one cure for his despair. Now, this young man, Victor, has been full of despair for the whole story. Even before he made the creature. He chooses for the moment, however, to visit the Alps with his family, hoping along with his father that the trip will restore his serenity. And it's interesting to note that Frankenstein's driving ambition resulted in a creation that is destroying his life. When he began his project, he hoped to gain an understanding of life process and an ultimate knowledge that would benefit mankind. Instead, he created a monster that is a threat to himself, his family, and in his opinion, the human race. So this creature is a threat to all of us. When Victor agrees to go to the Alps, he is once again shrieking his responsibility, denying what he did in his laboratory and refuses to admit it to others. He believes the creature is evil and that he is unaliving his brother, yet although his other family members may be in intimate danger, he warns no one. Hoping instead that the creature will disappear and choose not to strike again, but as Victor seeks a peaceful refuge in the magnificent scenery of the Alps, the creature seeks him out, refusing to go on being ignored and rejected by Victor. Once again, Shelley uses a romantic device of placing Victor in rugged natural settings, seeking comfort from the beautiful landscape as he continues to brood about his life and misfortunes. When he is in the mountains or alone, sailing on the lake, Victor often considers suicide as his accomplice. His dilemma, here Shelley follows another romantic tradition, allowing this highly emotional character in deep despair to consider ending his own. So he's considering doing his own unaliving. Hello, Noble Sharon. It's been a long time. I'm glad you're back. I'm glad I'm seeing you again on lives. All men hate the wretch. The creature fully understands his role in society, and now he is viewed by others as a monster. And he wants his creator to listen to him to understand him. Victor fully accepts the creature's proposal, telling us that they understood at last what the duties of the creator toward his creature were. Although the creature will have a heavy heart. Let's see. So the creature tells Frankenstein, misery made me a fiend. So do you think the creature's unhappiness justifies his unaliving behavior? So what Victor did to him does that justify him hunting down his family and unaliving them? So if you were left alone, just created by your creator, don't know what to do, would you go off and unalive his family to get his attention? It's just a hypothetical question. Would that come to your mind? Hello, Jarvis, and thank you for all of those. I appreciate you, my friend. We are talking about Frankenstein's monster here, his creation. We just read chapters 1 and 2. And the Frankenstein monster has confronted Victor, which is his creator, and has told him, misery has made me a fiend. And we're asking the question, do you think the creature's unhappiness justifies him murdering Victor's family? So that's all I have to ask. If you were the monster and you were created and you just woke up and were left to your own devices and somehow you figured out Victor, this guy just wandering around, has forgotten you, would you get his attention by murdering his family? Yeah. It sounds like my expert. Yes. It's just like, no, we don't need to take it to this extreme, my friend. I think there was other ways to get his attention. She's feeling justified. Yeah, I bet she is. Yeah, that's awful. That's awful, Jarvis. But yeah. Okay, and here we go. Victor contemplates unaliving himself while sailing on the lake, and again when climbing the mountain. So discuss this change in Victor's personality from his university days. So this young scientist, is just what we would call emo here. He was unhappy with his life, and he found some books that he thought that he could find the Philosopher's Stone and reanimate life, which he does. Very brilliant young man, but he does that. Yes, he's very happy with his discovery and happy doing it, but after he does it, he is just like, it's ugly. I don't like it. I'm sad again, and now I'm going to go sail off on a boat and think about unaliving myself and jumping off of a cliff and unaliving myself. And, hey, my family has been murdered. I wonder who did it. Oh, I created the monster. Did the monster do it? Maybe to get my attention? And I'm out in the wilderness and there's no one else here but me and my creation because, Victor, did you think that maybe this creature was following you around everywhere you went? Like, the monster didn't just stay out there, he was following you. And he wanted to talk to you. And I think if you would have just talked to him to begin with, a lot of things would have been a lot better off for you. So, Jarvis, if you decide to create something, stick around and talk to it before you decide to abandon it. That's my suggestion to you. You know, you got to be a dad to your creations. I guess that's what this is, the moral of this story. Or bad things are going to happen. But that's all I got for you guys on this wild trip of Frankenstein. And take care. Thanks for stopping by. Yeah, exactly. It's funny. But take care. I appreciate you guys. We'll read chapters 3 and 4 coming up. Take care.